Good evening and welcome to this house in the year 1727. Beneath the choking humidity of the Louisiana swamps, there existed a plantation so remote, so shrouded in cattails and fog. His blood was found smeared on the walls of the Great Hall. Stories of dark rituals performed. Beneath the blood moon, whispers of ancient gods stirring in the muck. No trace of the missing slaves or their leader could ever be found. What happened at Bellemare? Did Fortifa lead his fellow captives in an uprising, turning on their master and disappearing into the impenetrable swamplands? Or was something more sinister at foot, something older and viler than man, something that took root in the darkest corners of the human psyche? You decide in the comments below. His journal opened to a page that read only, "Tonight, I tasted my own fear." His body was never found, only a single thing left on the long oak table, a raw, wet human heart. The slaves had vanished into the swamp, every single one, gone before sunrise. The plantation stood silent, birds avoiding it, even the mosquitoes unnerved. When the town militia came days later, they found no footprints, no drag marks, no signs of struggle, only Lucien's dogs, dead from fear, their eyes wide and unblinking. And as for 44, he was never seen again. That few outside the region believed it truly existed. They called it Bellemare, the beautiful marsh, though there was nothing beautiful about it. The land was bitter, soaked in blood and debt. Its owner, Lucien Durat, a French aristocrat turned colonial sadist, had bought the place for pennies on the acre and filled it with slaves brought in chains from West Africa, men and women whose names were stripped from them the moment they stepped onto the steaming soil. Lucien believed fear was more potent than the whip. He patrolled at night, barefoot and silent, like a panther. He didn't scream. He whispered threats into ears and smiled when he branded flesh. He kept a journal, obsessively noting every broken spirit, every rebellion crushed, every name that begged for mercy. His obsession, however, centered on one slave above all, a man he never named, a man referred to only as 44. 44 was tall, unnaturally tall, with eyes like river stones, cold, dull, immovable. He spoke little, but when he did, others listened. The other slaves followed him without question, not out of camaraderie, but because they feared what might happen if they didn't. No one knew what village Fortifa came from, only that he arrived on the third shipment Lucien received from Senegal. Unlike the others, he had no scars, no wounds. It was said he killed the overseer on the ship and was left unpunished. The sailors swore they heard him chanting in a dead dialect under the full moon. Lucien, fascinated, invited Fortifa to his dinner table once a month, not to eat, of course, but to sit, shackled in chains of silver, while Lucien dined. He spoke to Fortifa like a priest to a pagan god, testing boundaries, probing for signs of weakness. But Fortifa said nothing. He only watched. Sometimes his lips moved in rhythm, silently mouthing words that made even Lucien pause. Then, on the night of August 14, 1729, under the hottest blood moon Louisiana had seen in decades, Lucien disappeared, though rumors spread like locusts across the countryside. And thank you for watching. Every so often a place will appear in my feed that sends me down a research rabbit hole. This happened again. What started as a little bit of research turned into me spending way too much time trying to find the source of this story. If you aren't familiar with Haitian culture or history, there's a lot of really good information out there. I would recommend looking into it because I don't want to misrepresent anything here, but I did find a likely candidate after some research. This is where I start searching. My first search term was pretty broad. I just typed Bellemare, Louisiana into Google and saw what came up. Looks like I got played. I feel like I've been saying it wrong this whole time. Anyway, if you search the name, there's a website with a bunch of stories set in this universe. Until next time, see you later. I don't know how many of these stories are supposed to be canon, but they're definitely fun to read. But wait, there's more. But they are a really great example of how a little bit of research can go a long way. Even though I didn't find the original source of the story I wanted, I did find a whole host of other interesting stories to read. Apparently, this whole story is part of a shared fictional universe created by Eric and his brother. John Edward Gignard. From here, I found an article on Atlas Obscura about a ghost in Louisiana that eats people's hearts. Pretty intriguing, right? As I read through the article, I got a few details that I could use to narrow down my search. All we really need to know is that it's an old plantation house deep in the Louisiana swamps that was abandoned over 100 years ago. I did not find the original source, but what I did find was fascinating and led me to a playlist of other really interesting creepypastas, trying to track down the source of this story and the rabbit hole that ensued. So let's get into it. After reading this one, I have to assume that the author took inspiration from Haitian folklore. Specifically with the Boutman aspect, there's a mention of the author visiting Belle-Mere while researching for the hunger. Bingo, this must be it. Or maybe not. The more I dug, the more confused I became. I thought it would be cool to share the process of me as usual. The story starts off with a mysterious location in Louisiana known as Belle-Mere. The exact location isn't important here, which I found interesting because Lucien is also the name of the main character in The Hunger by Omakatsu, a book about a haunted whaling ship. Coincidence, maybe, but I decided to look into it anyway. And now for the juicy part. The article mentioned that the ghost was apparently based on a real person who committed terrible atrocities, including torturing and killing slaves. The ghost was named Lucien. While researching the author, I came across an interview where she discussed how she drew inspiration from real historical events and figures. And guess what? Turns out there are several stories about Lucien, the Shadow Man of Belle-Mere, all written by the same author, Eric J. Gignard. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Eric's stories about Belle-Mere are only a small part of the grand scheme of things. So, as always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoy these videos, please consider supporting me. Deep in the uncharted bayous of southern Louisiana lie the answers to some of history's greatest mysteries, or so says the legend. It was 1961 when the U.S. Geological Survey decided to chart the deeper wetlands of this treacherous landscape. Helicopters malfunctioned above a previously unexplored patch of bayou, so a team was sent in on foot. They found Dr. Harrowen's boots neatly placed outside what used to be Belle-Mere's main entrance. The federal government quickly sealed off the surrounding land, citing preservation efforts. A local priest went missing in the early 70s, then a pair of paranormal investigators in the 90s, then a group of thrill-seekers in the 2000s, all vanished without a trace. This time he stands before a curtain of moss hanging from the ceiling, sweat glistening on his brow. "You all said it was a hoax," he says, voice trembling. "Said Belle-Mere was just a story, but I found it, and it's..." A low growl emanates from the darkness behind him. The camera shakes as if struck by unseen fingers. "There's something in here that knows my name." The video ends with a black screen and static, but satellite imagery shows something far stranger than neglect. But when they searched his car, they found his phone still recording. A man who refused to break. Who turned the tools of cruelty into an altar of power? A man who, in consuming the heart of his master, unshackled something far more ancient and insatiable. Somewhere deep in the marsh, he waits. And if you listen, if you find yourself in the right place on the wrong night, you might hear it too, that long deliberate breath, the kind that isn't yours, left on a damp, red-stained table as if waiting for someone. He was a popular YouTuber known for exploring supposedly haunted locations. He documented everything. His first video shows him standing before the rusted iron gates of Belle-Mere. He tries the handle. It's locked. He looks around for a way in. Then he finds a break in the wall, squeezes through and steps inside. The camera falls to the ground, capturing the overgrown path leading to the house. He follows it, hacking at vines with a machete until he reaches the front steps. Here he stops, takes a deep breath, looks up at the boarded windows and pushes open the door. We see him walk inside, then nothing. The camera stays on that door, the floorboards groaning ominously as if disturbed by whatever lurks within. No animals, no growth, just a dark blotch pulsing like a wound. Among them, the lead scientist, the esteemed Dr. Mary Harwin. Her mission? Record the area's topography, hydrology and soil composition. Her equipment, a tape recorder. Most of her 18 audio logs are dull, filled with complaints about mosquitoes and readings of water. pH. Then the tone changes. Day 3, she says, found structure. The woodwork resembles 18th century French colonial, but it's warped, almost alive. It almost seems to breathe. I swear it groans at night. I didn't sleep. Night 4, she says. The wind shifted. Heard voices, footsteps, chains dragging metal moans. It's coming from inside the structure. I am setting up a perimeter of stakes around the house and tying small flags to them, so we can keep track of any changes overnight. Night 5, she says. I heard voices again tonight, distinctly human, moving closer. One of the flags is down. I don't want to go out there. I think something's watching us. It feels like we're being hunted. On the 6th and final log, she whispers urgently, there's a man watching us. I think he's been here longer than the trees. Then the transmission cuts out, replaced by static. When the Coast Guard arrived at the site 2 days later, and so began the mystery of Belmere, a tale shrouded in shadows and whispers that refuses to stay buried. The legends say it was built by a cruel man named Etienne Devours, whose wealth came from the suffering of others. Rumor has it he kept slaves shackled in the very attic of the mansion, their cries for mercy echoing through the night. When he wasn't flogging them, he'd stand by the window watching the sunset over his fields of sugar cane, dreaming of a world where he, too, could be free. Some nights, the ghosts tell us, he'd walk those fields, his white shirt billowing behind him like a shroud. Other nights, he'd dance with his captives a macabre waltz under the pale glow of the moon. They say he grew so fond of one slave, a young woman named Celeste, that he offered her a choice, freedom or eternal damnation. She chose freedom, but as soon as she stepped off the plantation, he shot her dead. So now he spends his afterlife chained to the altar in his temple of misery, forever seeking absolution for his sins. Over the years, a handful of brave or foolish souls have ventured into the forbidden zone, the first explorers since the government's mysterious lockdown. Then in 2018, a man named Richard Healer set out to change that. 6 months later, he uploads a second video. Days later, his body was found, or what remained of it. They never recovered the camera. So the story of 44 persists not as a cautionary tale, not as a myth, but as a festering truth hiding beneath centuries of denial.